Okay, so this is about side projects for fun and profit. My Twitter is down there. My DMs are open, so if you ever want to contact me after, you can do that. The URL, you can get this anytime. It's just a Google Drive slide deck, publicly available. So I guess start with the obvious question: what's a side project? I assume most people here have jobs. Side project is basically obviously something you're going to do on the side. There's going to be a lot of overlap with what I talk about with bootstrapping a company. Obviously, there are similar things you can do to get your project off the ground, to get more users. We're going to cover how to get users. We're going to cover money a little bit. We're going to cover how to get the idea. These are common kind of pitfalls. We're not going to get too much into legal stuff. I just moved from California, where it's easy to work on a side project. It might be a little different here from what I've heard. People are kind of afraid to work on side projects. You can talk to me after. There are ways to get around that. There are ways to get around everything. So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to publicly talk about how do you hide your side project. But there's always a way around. So yeah, side projects is about a project where there's no funding. You're not necessarily very ambitious about being a billion-dollar company. You don't really want that. You don't want to have to deal with customer support. You just want a little bit of money on the side. And ideally, you want multiple income streams. So a little bit about me before I get too far into my ridiculous number of slides here. I'm currently lead engineer at a company called Yard Club in San Francisco. I just moved here and I work remotely. It just got acquired by literally in the last 24 hours from a Fortune 500 company. I've also started ShopScene, which is an inventory management e-commerce company, and Postcard, which is an Instagram e-commerce. These are both side projects. I've been through 500 startups and plug-and-play retail accelerator in the Bay Area. Before that, I was an engineering manager at Adobe. Got there through an acquisition of Efficient Frontier, and through an acquisition of Context Optional, which some people may have heard of here if you worked at 8th Bridge. Before that, I was basically an engineer designing toys for kids and also in pro audio. So kind of a varied path, which is kind of how I like it. Just like to have a bunch of different ideas I can work on and then move on to something else. So why have a side project? You guys probably, this is probably an obvious question, but freedom. And usually the typical reasons is you get to set your own expectations. You get to set your own environment. You can work from home. You can have employees. Ideally, you don't want any. You kind of want to have total control. You can set your own timeline. So a lot of people think having a startup is freedom, and then they go to get investment money. Even if it's from friends and family, you now basically have a boss. You really just want your customer to be the boss, and you don't want a lot of customers. You want the right amount of customers where you can kind of handle support. They pay you, but there's not you're not making or breaking anybody's life. It's also, how I think about it, is kind of a hedge, okay? If you have a day job, you're obviously at the whim of your boss, your industry. I kind of think of it as, and not only that, but, well, we'll get into it a little bit. You're kind of hedging against world events as well. You're hedging against who's been elected. I kind of think of it as kind of rental income. If you have rental property in different locations, or if you have a diverse stock portfolio, you're hedging against different things that can happen in different industries. I kind of think of side projects as in a similar way. You really just, oh, sorry, it's too loud. Okay, cool. just at back of the envelope numbers, if you have a project that is, you got 100 customers, they're paying you what typical 10 to 30 bucks a month SaaS. You ideally want recurring revenue, not like a 99-cent iPhone app. That's $1,000 right there. And we'll get into what kind of ideas are good for this, but that's the kind of numbers I think about. I'm not looking for how am I going to be worth $1 billion to get an exit or to get, to go IPO. That's the last thing I want. I just want a little bit to fly under the radar, maybe start another project, and now like I currently have my 2 projects on the side. They collectively bring in several $1,000s a month, and there's no employees. There's not a lot of customer support to deal with. They can kind of help each other, and that's great. I have nobody to answer to. If something goes down, the other thing I can kick up, and if something takes off, that's great, but it's not a requirement. The other thing is, obviously, you can impress a day job. There's in most companies I've worked for, everybody's got side projects, and at some point, everybody's bringing in something they learned into the day job, and it's had a very positive effect. Whether it's you're bringing in Lambda, there's all kinds of technology that you don't really get to try early on in a project when you have bosses and you have other people deciding. But if you can come in, make a case that you tried something and it worked on your own time, that's just going to help you in your day job. So who's got side projects? Probably a lot of you do. But you can go to indiehackers.com to actually read interviews with folks who are making, in some cases, if you go to Park, I don't know if Park.io is here, but there's a guy who's making $125,000 a month with no employees, and it's just notifying people when domains that they're interested in go up for sale. That apparently is a big market, and he is able to, it was a problem for him at one point. He decided to solve his own problem and then just sell his solution, and that's now his whole thing. That's perfect. That's just, nobody, there's no boss he has to deal with. It's probably very simple tech. You're probably dealing with Namecheap's API or GoDaddy's API, Twilio for notifications, and that's really all you have to do. You check out indiehackers.com, there's tons of other examples, and also the stories of the founders who have stumbled into their side project, which in some cases have turned into real big businesses. So project idea, obviously, you want to, this takes a long time to think of a unique idea that you can bring to the world that nobody's ever done before. That's wrong. You do not need to have an original idea. If your expectations are just slicing a little bit out of an established market, take something like appointment scheduling, right? So you go to get a haircut or some kind of a service appointment, a salon or whatever it is. They all have a different service. They all suck. The incumbent is MindBody Online. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's terrible software. They just survive basically on their name. There's a bunch. It's very fragmented. There's a bunch of little startups that have come up, but nobody's kind of really emerged as the winner. In my opinion, that's the perfect thing to jump in and just throw in another clone. And I'll show you how to get users for that as well. Throw in another clone, let the incumbent and other folks do the marketing for you to build the market, and just take 100, 200 users out of 7 billion in the world. That shouldn't be a big issue. And something like that, where it's scheduling, you're basically, again, you can tap into Twilio's a couple APIs. Twilio have a calendar, and you're kind of set. So everybody work on that. Another thing to take a look at, so for example, everybody's heard of Y Combinator. These are all their dead companies, okay? These are all dead startups that thought they were going to be billion-dollar companies that died for one reason or another. Now, companies die for tons of reasons. I've seen, having gone through multiple accelerators, I've seen everything. Founders get into fights. Unfortunately, in some cases, there's medical issues, or sometimes they just totally F up execution. Illegal stuff happens. So there's all kinds of reasons that businesses die, but they're not necessarily bad ideas. One thing I do is just go through this list and see if something resonates. And then try to figure out, well, why did that die? You don't actually have to be in San Francisco to kind of like go through the grapevine to figure out why things died, but you can, well, first of all, you can verify that it died. You can check out the traffic. Even if a company is alive and you think it's doing well, it could actually be dying. Alexa is not necessarily the most accurate gauge of traffic, but this is something I do. It's like, I look at a site and I'm like, I feel like I could do that. And then I go take a look, is this actually doing well or is this kind of BS? And sometimes you'll see that there was definitely a jump around the time when they maybe got into TechCrunch or something, or they got some funding, and then they've kind of gone silent, and yes, you can see that nobody's going to the site anymore. It's just completely dying. That's the perfect opportunity to jump in. So people go to Hacker News and Product Hunt, right? And they just kind of like find out about ideas, and then they move on to something else. Read the comments. That's where you can kind of figure out, who are all the other players in the space? Because in a lot of these, most of these comment boards, there's always smartasses who are like, yeah, I've heard about this is just like this or that or whatever. Make a list of all that, really kind of figure out like who's tried this. A lot of times you'll see comments that you can't see in the press about like why something actually failed. Maybe some tips on what would have actually helped the company, maybe through other employees or through people who kind of know more about the industry, and just kind of pick up pick up ideas, and something might resonate. Crunchbase, another great way to figure out what happened to a company, or figure out when's the last time they got funding. If they got funding in 2011 and you have not heard of them, but the website is still up, it's probably dead. You can also probably, through here and LinkedIn, you can also see if key employees and founders have moved on to other things. Great opportunity to jump in and take whatever that is, because they've probably seeded the market with, they've probably done the due diligence about at least figuring out, is there a market for this? They've probably, built the market. There's now enough people who probably know about whatever their idea is, that you can jump in there and take some users, get their money. AngelList, again, similar thing though. I find it's not always up to date as Crunchbase. LinkedIn, I mentioned. Great place to figure out what's going on with the employees. Are they still there, or have they moved on? Job boards. Job boards is something I look at to see what technology a company is using. Okay, if they're basically, I won't diss any technologies, but if they're using something archaic, you know that they're probably not going to go anywhere. They're probably just maintaining a system, and so you can go in there and out-innovate them. And then my favorite website is Glassdoor. So this is where I go if I've been turned down by a job, or a company is kind of like done me wrong online. But it's also a good place to research like what's going on in a company. If they're getting a lot of bad reviews from employees, they will come on here, leave a bad review, and dish. And I meant to like block out this company, but whatever. This is a public site. This is where you can also. It's all anonymous. Yeah, it is anonymous. So you can read about, is the CEO a total douchebag? Is management making specific problems? Are the employees smart? Are they dumb? Are they like, what's the deal? Is it just kind of like a bunch of like a slide down the cafeteria, and it just looks like a startup trying to act like a startup, or is this actually a real company? You can figure that all out from Glassdoor. And you can usually kind of see a trend of like, yeah, there was like, this company was going somewhere for a while and then kind of like shit hit the fan, or they just kind of like, they ran out of their AdWords budget and now it's just kind of going downhill. So all these sites, like, it looks like it's a lot of research. I'm usually sitting in front of the TV, have an idea, and I can now kind of go through all these and get a good picture as to whether I should jump in and try something in this space. And then, just through Google Trends in here, because yeah, if you have an original idea, this happens. I don't know why I picked pants, but so you can see like, let's say you're doing an e-commerce company, and it actually makes sense when a few slides ahead. But if you're doing an e-commerce company, this is a great way to figure out like what is cyclical, what is actually in the zeitgeist, and what's kind of like trending down. So these are 3 different kinds of pants, and you can tell that like bell bottoms for some reason are coming back up a bit, but people were shooting at them, and then they kind of like slowly went down. Yeah, it's kind of coming back up. Capri pants, I always bug my wife that they're always coming back every 3 years. There's a Gap commercial about Capri pants, but it's a very kind of like a spring kind of like cycle there, and then jeggings were. Sometimes you'll see a spike, and it's because there's some movie or some kind of like meme or something that came out, and. Oh, okay. Still learning. Okay, so how to build a side project. Patterns. Okay, so it's good to, whether it's a side project or your full-time job, it's good to understand that most small or big apps, whether it's web or mobile, are really just built upon very simple patterns. Basically, it's just another view for something in the database. So CRUD, everybody knows, well, a lot of people know what CRUD is. It's basically, you're either creating something, reading something, updating something, or deleting something. And literally, so I have Airbnb as an example here. It's really just showing a view of the database. You're either creating a listing, you're looking at listings, you're updating a listing, or you're deleting a listing. Now, you might be looking at a map view, or bookings. You might be looking at a list view, but it's really the same thing. Okay, Pinterest is you think of it as obviously a completely different website, but it's ultimately the same thing. You have some data. In these cases, they're visually appealing, but you have data that you're showing to your users. They might be creating some reaction to them, whether it's a booking or a pin, but they're just creating something in another table, and you are then displaying it to other people, and then they can update or delete them. So this has this kind of like, I don't know if this is, if I made this up, but I kind of like, for some projects that I think about, I also think about collect, transform, and present. You can collect or scrape data, whether it's news or something else, or you'll see in the next slide, jobs. Collecting data, whether it's real time or kind of like in a background job, you're doing something with the data. Here you're basically parsing and rearranging it, and then you're presenting it to people. So collecting some data that is useful to people in some way, whether raw or transformed, and then presenting it. This is, and sometimes you can use the same code to get different types of data and just present it in a more appealing way. This is like, you could do that, I mean, I'm gonna simplify everything, but you can do that in a night and have something up with basically no cost to you, and then decide how do you wanna market this, and then figure out how do you wanna charge for it. In the case of jobs, it's very easy. Like companies like Indeed, and there's probably millions of them, they'll create it's a job aggregation site, job search engine. They're basically scraping the entire web for jobs, getting some traffic, and then charging companies to actually do like a custom listing, sponsored listing. I mean, this is like super easy. They obviously don't care what it looks like. Um, and then, if it takes off, you can throw in like simple things like this notification thing on the top right. Super easy to do, but then it also just kind of creates more stickiness. It would take, I'm going to simplify again, but it's just like maybe 2 nights of work. And ideally, you can do this with 1 engineer on your own. So I'm going to talk a little bit about code-less ways to do it, and then later I'll talk about some kind of code patterns too. But there are for people who are not coders and definitely do not want to be coders, there are some ways to kind of put something together without code. There is a site called Built Without Code. So I think they're trying to be like a drag and drop, one of those drag and drop app creators. I'm not vouching for them, but I'm more kind of like, this is a site where it's showing you a list of companies that look like they have code behind them, but apparently they do not. They're just kind of like a collection of probably API integrations that this bubble company has kind of created for people. There is Zapier. So Zapier is obviously, it's kind of like if this then that, I'm sure people know about. It's basically apps responding to events and then connecting to another app. And basically you can create a chain of events. So something happens, a news alert happens, it sends a notification out to something, maybe it writes to a spreadsheet. It can turn on your lights at home. So it's just kind of connecting random things together. I want to bring up the example of, so Clara is the company that is an AI-based schedule assistant. It's quite popular. It's making quite a bit of money. It's getting a lot of buzz. There's AI behind that reads your emails and then creates meetings for you and whoever's on the other side. So it's all automated, but I mention it because it started as a totally manual operation. Now the people behind it who were doing this manually, their intention the whole time was to build software to automate it, but the way they started it was literally having access to other people, seeing other people's emails, and then manually doing the scheduling for them, creating the calendar events. So this, and then charging money for it. So, this is an example of starting a side project. It's almost like a lemonade stand. Starting a side project without really having to do any code, proving that you actually like this thing, and then figuring out ways to automate it, and then building a solid tech business behind it. And I can't obviously talk about side projects without mentioning dropshipping. I don't know if people know what dropshipping is, but basically you basically create a website, which is an e-commerce store, but you don't actually hold any inventory. You're basically a store where you do the marketing, you do the presentation, you take the orders, you take the payments, but as soon as an order comes in, it notifies the actual warehouser that an order's come in, and they ship the item directly to the user or to the customer. Now, this is pretty common. There is almost no skin off your back if you can create a Shopify store or WordPress, WooCommerce store. You're basically, it's kind of up to you how much marketing you want to do for it. Events, if you want to build, word of mouth, whatever it is, it's kind of up to you how much you want to put into it, but you're not holding any inventory. You don't have a warehouse, you don't have any of that. You're basically the salesperson for the warehouser or the manufacturer, and lots of e-commerce businesses have started this way. Printful is a company that you may not have heard of. Basically, they will print, you give them a JPEG, they will print t-shirts, leggings, posters, framed posters, hats, whatever you want. So you can basically, let's say you connect it to Twitter Trends, you can connect it to a Flickr account or whatever it is, create a nice website, whatever your niche is, and then an order comes in, you can have it notify Printful over an API, and it'll automatically contact the customer and ship an item to their to their address. So it's not quite it's not even drop shipping where there's inventory. The inventory hasn't even been created until the order has been placed, and so there's no skin on anybody's back really. They obviously take a cut, but there's no loss to you. You can create 100 of these in a bunch of different niches, and then decide where you want to allocate your. We'll talk about how do you get users and advertise, but you can allocate your advertising laterally wherever you want, up and down, depending on if you're making a bunch of sales or if you're not. And it's just something you can have in the background, bringing in cash. And an example of, so I don't think these guys use Printful, but here's an example of a couple designers in Amsterdam. They basically hooked into the OpenStreetMaps API, kind of like Google. Think of it as like an open source Google Maps. They're a bunch of graphic designers. They came up with some filters that basically take a map, stylize it, pop art or this or whatever it is, and then print it on super high quality paper, frame it if you want, and then send it to you. So this is something you can build once. It just connects to a couple APIs, and again, there's no inventory. It's totally on demand. You're not holding any inventory. Nobody's making it until an order has been placed, and customer's happy. And this happens to be, a niche with people who like maps of places, but you can you can think of whatever you want. Dogs. Well, you can think of whatever you want really. Something personalized, ideally, because then people can't it's harder to steal the idea. There's actually clones for this already, but the thing is, the cool thing about side projects, again, is if you get $10 million in funding and somebody clones your idea, now you're kind of screwed, because you now you're kind of handcuffed to this company and this idea. You have a boss with your investors, and you now have to over hustle more than maybe you want to do to kind of try to outmaneuver a competitor. Here, you do something simple, somebody might clone it, great. There's 7 billion people in the world. You're not necessarily there's no way you can you can almost have to try to get no customers, and then you can kind of move on to something else. Code. I'll go through stuff that I'm sure is probably table stakes for most people. I'll start actually with design. Most sites now have, I'll mention Unsplash. It's all high quality, and this is going to probably piss off designers, but these are all high quality. I'm a photographer, but I still like this site. These are all high quality, high res images that obviously look like cool stuff that you'd expect to see as a background of a website. So Unsplash, I don't even know what they do, but they're consulting or something, but they were looking for high quality photography, realized that it was hard to find, so they built, so this is not even their main thing. Unsplash.com is just a site which is basically like a Tumblr of high quality photos that people have submitted. What the people who submit their photos get is some place to showcase their work. What the company behind Unsplash gets is they get all these lead gens from people coming to Unsplash and maybe signing up for notifications for new photos so that they can then target them for their real business. And then what people who make cheap websites do, or side projects do, is we now have high quality photography that we can use to just throw as a background of a site and make it look more professional than it is. Bootstrap, people have heard of, a great way to just make a site look decent. Now everybody uses Bootstrap, but I actually prefer either Semantic UI Or my new favorite is, so material design Material Design Lite in particular is related to Google's material design guidelines. And I find it's not as extensive in terms of components as Bootstrap or Semantic, but I kind of like those constraints because it's a side project. You don't want a million things that your site is going to do. And so it kind of forces me to kind of like throw features out and keep the UI simple. And it doesn't hurt that your site looks like a Google, because now people are used to the how to get around, how to use the site, and you get the subconscious kind of like professional impression of whatever your app is. So that's all kind of front end, back end. What's going on in the back end? So you kind of use what you know. There's a bunch of projects I've tried to start thinking, okay, this is greenfield, this is awesome. There's this thing I've been meaning to try. I'm going to start building with it. Usually a few weeks later, I come back to what I know the best, whether it's Rails or something else. So be very mindful of like just trying something new just for a side project. It's not worth it. You want a side project to be quick. And it's very easy for us nerds to just fall into the hole of, oh, this new thing is just totally going to cut my time down, because it never does. Minimum viable code, that's kind of related to that. This is a side project. You want the least amount of code possible, the least amount of things to test, the least amount of things to maintain, and then the least amount of things to just write out, because it's like every line of code is more time. Yes?
Let's say you want to put up a website, maybe have it on Roku, free, advertising. You want how would you link in advertising for that specific topic?
Okay.
Monetize.
So they're asking me to repeat questions. So the question is about how do you put like AdSense kind of advertising on Heroku, or how do you direct users to your site?
No, just like where would I go for advertising? Maybe it's like AdSense would be completely.
So you want the ad network to be on your site? Okay, so then you'd have to find an ad network. Like, I mean, you can go to Google to like double. There's people here that know about display ads a lot more than I do, I'm sure. But there are networks that you can go to be basically you're basically the publisher. And I just don't know what the I try to get the money directly from the user. But if you have a site that gets a lot of traffic that's very specific to a niche, then you can probably get a lot of money from those networks. There's Carbon, which is, I think, specifically for like developer-focused ads. But you can talk to me after. We can kind of like research it together, or you can build one of your own. So you mentioned Heroku. Obviously, Heroku's been around for a while. I've used it for a long time. I've always thought that I'm going to get off Heroku because it's getting more and more expensive. But there is really no other. I haven't found any experience that is as smooth as Heroku. You can deploy in 3 lines. It's a lot easier than even Elastic Beanstalk on AWS, which is another basically another kind of Amazon's kind of clone of Heroku, but trying to give you a little bit more flexibility. I've always had problems with that. There's people want to get on DigitalOcean. There's Linode. There's a bunch of other stuff. There's Doku, which is kind of an open source Heroku clone that you can use on other services. I've tried all those personally. I've always kind of come back to Heroku. Even if I have to get on their $7 a month plan, it's like for a month to prove that something is kind of working. It's always worth it to me. There is, I'm sure people know about Lambda, or some people do. Lambda is basically a relatively new AWS service where there are no servers to manage, but you're basically where think of Heroku as deploying your app to a managed server. This is literally deploying as little as one line of code at a time, or a function to a server. And this function can basically be an API call that gets some notification from another service and then does some piece of work. So you don't need a framework, you don't need Rails, you don't need Node, you don't need any of that stuff. You can just, if you have a very simple function that needs to do something, you can put on Lambda. The costs are so low that I think they give you like 1 million requests for free. That even for a high traffic site, people have done the math more than I have, but you can be paying less than $5 a month for for hundreds of thousands, more than you'll ever get for a side project, trust me. And the way you pay for this, for Lambda, is not even a monthly fee. It's literally the number of requests and how long they're spending to perform your function, which often ends up being in the hundreds of milliseconds. So I recommend taking a look at that. Serverless is a framework on top of Lambda, which basically lets you write code and deploy all of your functions together instead of having to go to the Amazon console, which is not the most user-friendly. But here it lets you basically write your code in your favorite editor and then deploy it from your command line. You can have hundreds of functions, and serverless will create all the Lambda functions for you, all the services that will connect to your Lambda functions, whether it's your database or API gateway, which lets the public internet connect to your functions, whatever it is, Redis, whatever it is, it'll handle all that for you. So if you think you need an API or you want to write small, tiny functions, I highly recommend taking a look at this. Firebase, I'm sure people have heard of. Firebase is from Google, or Google bought Firebase. But here is basically, you can have a static website and a real-time database that you can connect to from your static website via JavaScript, and they give you that SDK. So they give you all the functions that you can do to call your database, to call storage, so you can call images, you can manipulate images. You can now, as of literally the last week or two, connect to Google Cloud Functions, which is Google's clone of AWS Lambda. So you can actually now do real backend stuff versus just stuff in JavaScript on the client. And you can do this on the web. There is Firebase for iOS and Firebase for Android too. So you can have all your devices. You can have an app easily across all 3 devices, connected to the same real-time database. This is a kind of a game changer, because you can have a static website, you can have a dynamic website, and you're writing very, very little code to do that. You get crash reporting. There's a bunch of other stuff like TestLab that I haven't even tried. They have the ad network too, so you can make money off this. Yep. So there's all that stuff that I haven't even looked at, but they have a great YouTube channel, which they're always like throwing new stuff on. This happens to me. This is now my go-to to start a website of any kind, of almost any kind, because it's familiar. It's free up to a ridiculous, the free tier is very generous, and that's kind of my go-to these days. S3 is, again, going back to Amazon, it's now a traditional way to do a static website. So if you're really just doing an HTML with a bunch of JavaScript, this is a great way to do it. Amazon gives you a CDN, so you have a very fast static website. It could be a landing page. I know our sponsors are Lead Pages, which is great company, but you don't need to be paying anybody a monthly fee to do a static website. Even with an email form, you can do a dynamic website on S3 and be paid nothing. And you can clone hundreds of these. React Native is worth mentioning because obviously people know what React is, probably React Native too. So React Native is, React and React Native come out of Facebook. They're both JavaScript frameworks. React is for the web. React Native lets you do native iOS and Android apps just by writing JavaScript. And it's kind of like, you may have heard of Cordova and PhoneGap and Ionic. Those are not as native as what you get with React Native. This is how I'll explain it for now. But basically, I mean, Facebook, Instagram, Airbnb, all of their native apps they're not Swift, they're not Objective-C. They are all built on React Native now. They've all transitioned over in the last year or two. So this is open source. It's out of Facebook. I highly recommend taking a look at this if you don't want to deal with learning Swift, Objective-C, Java to do your mobile apps. And again, you can apply the same patterns that you learn doing React across your web and mobile. Expo, worth looking at too. This is by Charlie Cheever, who's one of the early product managers at Facebook. It's a separate company, but it's basically, I don't want to call it like, I don't know how to call it, but it's a framework on top of React Native. I guess in some ways it's kind of like I think you can deploy to Expo, but it's kind of like they give you a lot of tools and a whole IDE to develop mobile apps without having to get into Xcode. So not only do you not have to know Objective-C and Swift, you don't even have to go into Xcode to build your apps and test them. And test them in real time. You can make a change in your editor, save it, and you'll see it live on your device, all through Expo's IDE. As long as it's on the same network, and this is wireless too. So this is like game changing. I don't want to deal with Objective-C, Swift. I've tried many years to learn that stuff, but this is kind of my go-to for, and I think a lot of people's go-to now to build mobile apps. Oh yeah, and so going back to finishing off all these cloud services for AWS and Google Cloud. So AWS has always been the kind of the gold standard up until I would say the last year when Google has really almost caught up, if not caught up, to what AWS is doing, and Microsoft is doing something similar, but I don't really know anything about Azure. Google is launching, and now Amazon is as well. They're launching new products all the time. I mean, they even have a jobs API. I don't know why. Obviously, there is a demand for job search, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about. One of the ideas that we were talking about earlier. You can probably use whatever this Cloud Jobs API is. Just use that as your data source, and build an intelligent, maybe a next gen job aggregation site built off Google's Cloud API. And they're coming out with new services all the time. Speech API translation, vision, I don't know if the tensor, machine learning. So now that they're in competition with AWS and Microsoft has jumped into the game, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what they're competing. AWS was basically owning it. Now they're competing, and it's just going to be an all-out war for lazy developers like us who just want to create money-making side projects. So I'm very excited as to what's going to happen over the next few years, because we'll be able to just kind of plug in a couple of these things, build a free website, and basically try to get 100 users, 200 users. That shouldn't be too hard to do. So I'll get to how I think about getting users in a second. But just to finish up, automated tests for side projects. You would think that you don't have time to do any tests, and I would obviously recommend not doing a full suite like unit tests for every little thing, but it is definitely worth it to at least do the happy path, like at least something to show that the main flow of your app is working, and just leave it at that. So just an integration test that goes to whatever sign up, tests that your data is coming in, it's being displayed. That for a side project I think is enough. If you don't do that, at some point obviously your app will die and you won't know about it. Some version gets upgraded. Somebody attacks your site. It's always good to have just at least one test to make sure that the most important things are working. The side project is always a balance. I just mentioned because the side project there's always a balance with your time, and I recommend not doing a full suite of tests, but at least having something up there. And just put some payment on your website. Just get some way, whether it's one of the first things I do for a SaaS app is just do your account page, your user account page, your user settings page. Just your first thing should be like, where should I put the checkout to get money? So learn Stripe, learn how easy it is to it's not one line of code, unfortunately, but it's the same. It's going to be the same thing for whatever you work on. Just figure out how to get a Stripe checkout, or Braintree or PayPal, whatever you want to use. But just get really familiar with their API docs. They're super easy to read, and that's kind of the, just set it and forget it. Learning, so obviously not everybody, I kind of briefly went over ways to do this without code, but the other thing I get asked is like, do I need to go to code camps and spend $24,000? And I say no. I think in some situations they're fine, but I'm not. I'm like, you can learn this. You can learn this stuff if you're kind of like judicious, or know how to look for the right, or know what helps you learn and find the right resources. For example, React. I've gone through a million blog posts and tutorials, but until I found this guy on YouTube, this is the first guy that actually explained it to me in a way that I can understand. And so I recommend trying it. If you want, it doesn't have to be this, but if there's something you're trying to learn, try a bunch of, go to YouTube. I don't know if everybody knows about YouTube, but there are a lot of bad tutorials, but you'll at some point stumble upon something that will be an organized playlist of lessons that will suddenly resonate with you, and it's worth it's definitely worth spending your whatever, like an hour or two, rather than sitting in a class for 2 minutes. I don't know, but I can. Some German. I call him German dude. I don't know. Look up. It's some cheesy type Mindscape or something. If you look that up on YouTube, but he's got this for Vue.js. He's got this for Angular, all the big frameworks, Webpack. It's first time I clicked was when this guy explained it. So. There's also this guy. I call him Indian guy. So I don't know his name. Oh, his name's Suraj. So he does a lot of machine learning and deep learning and AI stuff. Nothing I've actually had to use yet, but he actually used he'll explain that stuff using a real example that you could probably make a site out of right away. In this case, I don't know if this is the best example, but it's 8 minutes on how to use TensorFlow to do a language translator. So you can imagine you can build a bot or something right away with coming out of this tutorial, basically copying his TensorFlow code and making a language translator, which then you can there are a million ways you can make money off that, whether it's like give it away for free at the beginning, and then after a month or maybe 10 conversations, you start to charge money. But this guy also has other examples for like automatically generating text, basically summarizing news articles or Wikipedia articles and regurgitating that. I mean, there's tons of content marketing applications for that. Anyways, this guy, there's a lot of deep learning people trying to jump on the deep learning education bandwagon, but this guy actually kind of explains it in a practical way that is understandable, and then he uses real code. Okay, so went to work on a side project. Obviously, you probably all have jobs, and
So you got a next session for starting.
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, because time management, don't worry about that. Hackathon, don't bother with hackathons, basically. Hackathons are good for networking, otherwise they're distracting. What I like is personal hackathons, so set up a Saturday night, just you, starting 8 o'clock, and just kind of like go heads down on something. And just kind of like, psych yourself up. It's surprisingly effective, at least for me. This is a waste of time, and obviously, this is not inspiring for me, so I don't go to these things. Sleep, don't worry about that. You're not going to get any launch. Party, no. Social media posts with your friends, no, waste of time. You want landing page, no, waste of time, because you have to get a theme, you have to set that up. You want anonymous people, so look at Facebook targeting. This is how political campaigns are done now. You can go to Twitter or Facebook and target people by interest. Just spend $100 for 2 hours and see what you get. And do that across very, very specific demographics and figure out, are you seeing a spike? And then hone in on whatever that idea is and just keep going. Otherwise, drop it or figure out a way to tweak your idea. But this is how I would do it. Forget about social. Don't even tell your friends or family. You're not going to get an honest answer anyway. Just go for anonymous people and kind of get them that way. Look up what custom audiences and lookalike audiences are. Basically, you're giving Facebook email addresses of your users, and they'll find more users for you and give ads to your whatever your app is. App stores, so not the real app stores, but Slack, others, SEO. You know what that is. Okay, cool.